Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. We're in a heated year with presidential elections and chaos going on around the globe. But the biggest question is, how much of it is it real and how much of it is simply a distraction? I think many people are coming to a general consensus that, for instance, COVID-19 could be one of those things simply known as what they call a false flag. Joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program today is truth seeker, code breaker, and peacemaker. He's been awarded the Prague Peace Prize and adopted by the Apache Nation. He's also an author, international speaker, former journalist, musician with 2 solo albums. And the list goes on and on. Kind of makes you wonder how this gentleman spent the last 35 years to research many of the global conspiracies that many of us have come to know, such as the assassinations of JFK, the Swedish Prime Minister of Olof Palme, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, as well as John Lennon and Lady Di. He's going to be joining us here on the program today to talk about these things known as false flags, where he was able to predict a lot of these things happening up to 2 months before they actually happened. We'll discover how this is possible and what we can do so that we can see clearly through the veil of that which disrupts our reality. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Ole Dammegard. Ole, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Daniel.
Now, I remember watching a few things regarding how you became interested in this, and it started when you were a journalist and you realized that what was going on around in the world just wasn't making sense. And I kind of felt like, I felt the same way when I was growing up as a kid, like, what's going on here? Why can't these adults play nicely? Let's talk about how this all started for you.
Well, it goes way back to when I was a little child, I think, just like you. And I came to this world pretty innocent, and I landed into this family that was on the surface, the perfect family, but under the surface it was like, we call it democracy. We were allowed to do whatever we wanted as long as we did, as my dad said. And he was a former military, very strict, and we were never beaten, but it was very, like we feared him. And while I grew up, I started becoming very sensitive to what was being said, what was not being said, feelings of tension under the surface, even though people were smiling that something else could be going on. And this has helped me later in life, because it now turns out that about a couple of years ago I found out that both my parents seems to have been working secretly for NATO after the Second World War, from the mid-50s and onwards, involved in what was a NATO operation that went under the name of Gladio. And so it now turns out that I and my family have been living a double life without me having a clue about it at all. But at the same time, I think that this has given me the perfect sort of boot camp education into covert operations, to black ops, to psychological operations, and so on, because my whole life has been it. And so I think that is what has given me the gifts of, for one, the passion about finding out what's actually going on, but also the sensitivity to really start feeling when we're being deceived and when we're not. Because over the years, and these are many years now, I've learned more and more and more about how the world has been deceived and pushed by occult forces. I'm not talking about well, I am almost like satanic forces, but I'm talking about hidden secret networks like the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Committee of 300, the Club of Rome, these type of organizations, hidden brotherhood organizations that are part of the global, what they call themselves the elite. I think that I have a lot less flattering words for them. But if you look at the world as a power structure, it is shaped like a pyramid, totally compartmentalized, pyramids within pyramids within pyramids, so that we, the normal people that are at the bottom of this pyramid, have absolutely no idea what we are part of and who is actually running this whole show. And so this is what I've devoted many, many years of my life. It's almost 40 now. And the areas that I specialized in, because I felt there's so much going on here that I need to focus somewhere, otherwise it will just be totally confusing for everyone listening and I won't make any kind of difference at all. But if I become like a laser light with an exact focus on two of the major areas that are being used as weapons against us, silent weapons against us. And the areas that I've specialized in is top political assassinations, like you mentioned before, and so-called false flag operations. So it's even come to a point now where my last name had become a verb. So hashtag Dammegard or hashtag Dammegarding actually means to be able to find hidden clues that will expose the next upcoming alleged false flag attack, alleged terror attack, or alleged mass shooting. And up to date, over these years, I've been able to precisely predict 59 of these alleged terror attacks and mass shootings up to 2 months before they actually occurred on international radio. So I have a monthly newsletter you can find on lightonconspiracies.com, which is my website, lightonconspiracies, plural. There's so much going on.com. And in my newsletter, if you go to the archives, you will see this is when I said it, boom, that's when it happened. This is when I said it, then that's when it happened. This is when I predicted it, and that's when it happened. So, and this is not because I'm super intelligent or got a crystal ball. It's just that over the years, also by being contacted by insiders who have been following me from sort of, I don't know why, but they've become more and more interested in what I'm doing and also really aggressively try to stop me. Some of these people have given me information from the inside, and this was how I learned about that they actually, the people that are involved in these type of operations, they actually leave clues in the forensic evidence for the next upcoming attack. And I mean, that sounds absolutely bizarre and strange. And I didn't understand it either before an insider contacted me and said, it's because of the law of karma. The people who carry out so much of these horrific events and are behind so much horror in the world, they are terrified of the law of karma, which is like what you do comes back to you, or that the way you plant a seed, that's what grows, or how you make your bed, that's how you're going to lie. This is the whole thing. So for their own egoistic self-defense ways, they secretly but still show us in hidden ways right in front of our eyes, right in our face, what the next thing is going to be, because they want to avoid the effects of the law of karma. Because according to what this insider informed me about, the way they interpret this law is that if they show us, even in subtle ways, what they're going to do, and we do not react, then the bad karma is on our shoulders. It is almost like by not doing anything, we give our consent to these actions. And in addition, if they show us, even in subtle ways, we do not react and they manage to pull it off, then not only do we get bad karma on our shoulders, but they add good karma to their lives, which in the way I see it, it's absolutely sick and twisted. But according to this insider, this is exactly how they function, the people who are carrying these things out. And so once I started understanding that this was actually true, this was in January 2015, from then on, I started only focusing on trying to find the hidden clues. Where are they? Where is it? And very often it's hidden in one photo that is being pumped with symbolic messages and all kinds of stuff. But most of the time it's in one photo. So it's a matter of finding that exact photo that is the clue. This clue can often be very tricky to find out. The better I and other people get at decoding it, the more advanced the coding is. But we're getting pretty good at it, and that's why we've been able to predict 59 of these up to date.
You know, it's really fascinating to take a look at all of this. One of the biggest ones in recent history, and there's been quite a few, but the biggest one, especially for here in America, was 9/11. And it was funny because the way I felt about it the very next day was sort of like, well, this doesn't make any sense to a degree. Now, here's the weird thing. I discovered 9/11. It was a beautiful afternoon. I decided there was a place that I like to go for breakfast, and so I got up around noontime and was on my way there, and the radio just wasn't saying much. We'll let you know more details as we get them, so forth and so on. I'm switching around all the stations, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Everybody was saying the same thing. And so I finally arrived to have breakfast. I get out of the car. I go to the steps, and right to the left of me, they had a newspaper vending machine, and right there it says, buildings in New York City attacked. And I was like, oh, wow, this happened today? And that's exactly what had happened at about 9 o'clock in the morning. And this is a West Coast time that I'm there about 12:30. And as I'm going in, then they have the TVs out. And that was something that was unusual for this place because they never had TVs out. And they were talking about what had happened. And then I was like, oh, my goodness. And the weird part about discovering this whole thing, what was really going on, where I was at when I finally discovered what it was a restaurant known as the Bomber, which actually has a B-17 World War II bomber out in the front of it. That's a hell of a place to discover 9/11, if you ask anybody, I think. But there was just so much of it that wasn't making sense. And, anybody can say, well, after the fact. I said, these were just intuitive instincts that I had about, for instance, the Pentagon itself. The buildings, not so much. But that one there, and then the plane crash of flight, I think it was 97 or 93 in Pennsylvania. And I'm thinking, well, okay, if this is true that these were actually planes that hit, where are the engines? You just couldn't see anything, and usually the engines, because of what they're made of, are going to survive something like that, but none of it made sense. Now, when it comes to something like 9/11, because of the vast experience that you have, what clues did you feel you had before this actually occurred?
Before it actually occurred?
Yes.
I was not aware of it. I mean, okay. I was not aware of it, but when I look back, there's hundreds of clues in movies, in magazines, on photos, and they've been preparing that one for many, many years and putting it out there, 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. You had the Bush Sr. as well in 1990 on September 11, that exact date. That was the first time ever he took a step forward and presented the New World Order. Listen to that speech. That is exactly on the day 11 years before 9/11 happened. And Bush is key in this whole thing. We're talking about a total inside job backed with Israel, Saudi money in the background, but an absolute inside job there built on the old Roman template, problem, reaction, solution. The human power, secretly create a problem. This is nowadays in the form of an alleged terror attack, bombing, mass shooting, financial crash, or virus. These viruses, they love them. They love them because they are so much better than other operations, because they know they don't need any political agenda. They go beyond borders. They have no language barriers. They're perfect. This virus, it's absolutely perfect. So they secretly create a problem. The reason they create this problem is to get an emotional reaction from the population. They want to scare us shitless, sorry my French. They want to scare us into a reaction of absolute horror, so that we go, oh my God, we need protection. And then we turn towards the people that we think are there to protect us, not understanding that it's actually them who have created the problem, saying, please help us. And they will then serve as the solution, which is every single time the same. It's more and more surveillance, more and more cameras, more and more militarized police, more and more Robocops in the street driving around in tanks, more or less, us having to pay for our slavery, giving up our liberties, our civil rights, everything, also financing unjust wars based on false terrorism and so on. So this is an old Roman, it was the Romans that came up with this template, and it's been used on such a scale that it's absolutely absurd that we have not seen through it. But actually, I would say it's problem, reaction, fascism. That is the correct terms nowadays. So this is what they're pushing through. So they secretly create the problems. In this case, we're talking about 9/11. That's a super classical false flag operation, scaring the whole world. They always hit a specific target. They have to have a national, if it's a country or the world that is being attacked, they go for something that has a national emotional value, somebody that symbolizes that nation. So would it be in France, it would be the Eiffel Tower. Would it be in Rome, it would be the Colosseum. Would it be in Greece, it would be Pantheon or Acropolis, something like that, that really hits you. Or if it's in the US, what was the symbol of the US at that time? The Twin Towers. That was the pride of New York and also of the symbol of the US. So they hit that very deliberately to get the emotional reaction going so that they could get away with the solution, which in this case was the war on terror, which is an absolute bizarre statement. The war on terror, who are you fighting? Are you fighting a noun? Or who's the enemy? And they served us very quickly here. Anyone against them is the enemy. That's the real terrorist. But it's actually the exact opposite. So problem, reaction, solution, that is over and over again. And if you look at many of these operations, they're absolute no-brainers, like 9/11. I mean, within 4 seconds after the building started falling down, I knew right away, this is absolutely not what we're being told. As long as they were burning, I was sort of buying into it. But then free fall, you have two of the strongest buildings in the world with armored steel, tons and tons and tons, marble floors, concrete walls that were made to withstand hurricanes and typhoid, all of tornadoes, all kinds of that, even the impact of airplanes. And here, suddenly, from having a fire with low temperature, you can see the color of the flames, you can see the color of the smoke, that shows low temperature, and suddenly they fall, free fall speed. I mean free fall. If you had been standing on top of the building, letting go of an apple, the apple and the building came down with the same speed, which is absolutely not possible. This whole pancake theory that NIST and other corrupt institutions have served us, absolutely. If it's a pancake, then you have friction with every single story that comes down. It would go bum, 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 bum. Here, the buildings are dustified. They turn into dust midair. You can see some of the steel beams. If you go in slow motion, you can see how they go into dust. And so where are all the furniture? Where's all the marble floors, the glass, the bodies, the toilets, the desks, anything? Where did they go? And here you have, I mean, there would have been like 13 stories, a big pile of rubble, had it been a free fall, controlled demolition, just straight down. But here we see they are dustified. They turn into dust. There's absolutely no rubble at the bottom. Instead, there's a big hole underneath. It actually goes negative, this heap of rubble. So what actually happened there? That is a very good question. And I believe that what was used that day was every single type of armory they had, because they could not fail. They used controlled demolitions. These buildings were packed with explosives months ahead. They were working for months and months to do this whole, including Building 7 was also rigged with explosives for controlled demolition. But there was also a nanothermite they used to cut the beams. There was multiple bombs underneath the buildings as well. It seems like they were mini nukes, and I tell you, the way that they were justified were through what is called directed energy weapons, which sounds like science fiction, but I tell you, you just go to Lockheed Martin's own website, they will brag about this technology that have been developed for more than 40 years. They will tell you exactly how it works. And I believe that the enormous power source that was used that day to justify these came from a laboratory out on Long Island called Brookhaven National Laboratory. That they got a particle accelerator. That's where they got it. It's free view straight to Manhattan. And I believe, and I'm not the only one, that believes that that was where the dustification of the buildings came. They were taken down in combination with controlled demolitions. You can see the explosions going off floor by floor by floor. But the dustification, that is not, you cannot explain that with any other than directed energy weapons. And when my daughter, she was about 4 at the time, I was sitting one day going through some of these videos where you see the buildings coming down. And so she came in and she said, "Dad, what are you looking at?" I mean, this is a 4-year-old child. And I said, so I gave her the official story. She looked at me and said, "Dad, I'm a child. I'm not stupid. Why are you lying to me?" That is the reaction of a healthy mind that is not programmed or packed with propaganda lies. You know, she just saw it. And I tell you, anyone who doubts this, I say, please take a Coca-Cola can, empty it. The Coca-Cola can is built more or less of the same material as a plane, except for the engines, which are made of titanium, like some of them 6 tons big. So just like you say, where are the engines, where are the holes after the engines and so on. Anyway, you got this aluminum body of a flying vessel. If you fill that with jet fuel, turn it on fire, and then smack it up against a concrete wall with armored arms inside it, and it gets dustified, then I'm willing to believe the official story. Up until that day happens, it's like absolute 100% BS, bull s. I'm keeping my tongue in that, but it's an absolute no-brainer. Then who did it? And who could get away with it? Who could clear the whole area of the evidence? Who could, while it was still ongoing more or less, start transporting away all the evidence that showed foul play? Who did that? And here we come into big corporations. We got the Bush family, very central in this whole thing. The Carlyle Group, very central in this whole thing. You got the whole thing where it had been in our face for years. You know, they were coming out with this the need of a new Pearl Harbor, which Pearl Harbor was also a false flag operation. The Americans was very aware that it was going to happen, but they needed it to justify their actions to go in and totally crush Japan and other cities or countries. So it's like problem, reaction, solution. That is very, very important to know.
Sort of like hiring the bully, and then the bully justifies his reasons for getting paid by going and stirring up some stuff. And I really appreciate, for instance, as you were saying, as you got into the details of 9/11, is that, well, they show us a lot of clues. Now, here's one of the weirdest ones that I caught, and it was actually after the fact, but I thought, boy, this is kind of weird, because this movie, titled Armageddon, starring Bruce Willis, actually happened before 9/11. And eerily enough, there is a meteor shower, if you will, that happens in New York City that does a lot of destruction. But one of the final parts of that particular scene is 2 of them had actually hit each of the towers at about the same location that the planes actually hit the towers. And yet this movie came out, you know, a good few years before 9/11 actually happened. And you're thinking, okay, this is pretty crazy when you look at that, to realize that what you're saying, you know, that they actually put it right there in your face. And so when it happens, as you say, it allows them to be complicit in what they're doing with no negative karma coming back to them, as though we shoulder the blame.
They need to show us for their sake. It's like the old stories. I think it's almost like this, the way this matrix or universe or whatever you want to call it, what we're living in, it's almost like it's set like that evil needs to tell us what it's going to do. It's just like, you know, the big bad wolf. He's knocking on the door, asking to be let in by the piglets, you know, and they open the door, he eats them, boom. But it's like, if you see all the old stories, they have a very similar thing also in old philosophies. And so when they're talking about evil, the fight between good and evil, it is almost like the devil or whoever is behind this needs to let us know. And then if we allow it, or it's the thing with karma is it's not only what you do, but it's also what you do not do. I think many people forget that when they're sitting quiet and not doing anything while the world is going down. the karma has also to do if you are not doing anything. And actually, the people not doing anything, even though they might suspect or know stuff, are the dangerous ones. They are actually the most dangerous ones because they allow this evil to take place. And they look the other way, and that is so not okay. And now we are in a situation, we're indirectly blessed with this horrific situation that is going on now, that just say, sorry, you have no option anymore. Either you need to choose sides. You want to go for believing mainstream media propaganda and being controlled by fear, or do you see, just like you said, this makes no sense at all. Will you try and find out the real truth behind these operations? And then once you start seeing it, use that to free yourself and become a free individual with a passion for liberty, a passion for equality, for beauty, for creativity. It's almost like now we're being separated into two parts. And this is very sad to see in many families. You got families that are brought up under the same roof that becomes enemies over these things. The arguments go really, really, they become very, very hurtful and destructive. But it's almost like, during civil wars, you will see the same phenomena where people in the same family start fighting each other. They end up on two sides of the war. And it almost, if you go back, this is a classical situation. You go back to the Bhagavad Gita, the old Indian incredible book where Arjuna is this warrior, the perfect warrior, but he does not want to fight. But he is forced into doing something. He does not want it, but he is the one that has to do it. And because there are people on both sides that he loves, that are family, that he respects, but the war is not started by him, and he has to do something. And I'm a Raja Yoga teacher, and my Raja Yoga teacher, Nalin Chellam, gave me the name Arjuna because I feel exactly the same. I don't want to fight. I don't want to be in this situation. But here we are. I mean, it is all around us. There's no way we can go. We need to face this whole thing. And the real battle should be fought in our mind, between our ears, so that we purify ourselves and can then meet this as fearless and pure as possible, so that we don't create bad karma for ourselves and others, but that we let the truth, in a totally non-violent way, clean this whole mess up.
And it's also when this whole pandemic began to surface its head, even my wife, she was saying, well, here comes a false flag. I can just see it coming down now. She has a journalism background, and I would say that I do to a degree, but I'm just somebody who's always been curious about things. And so as I got into radio many years ago, you begin studying different things. And one of the things that I came across was a documentary series that I found at the library called The Century of Self. And what this was a fascinating 6-part documentary about the creation and rise of propaganda and how that all works. And you come to realize that this was created by one Mr. Edward Bernays, who happened to be the nephew of one Sigmund Freud, and talks about how they use the art of distraction. Those in power, if you will, say, people, if left alone to their own devices, will probably be pretty self-destructive, so what they do is they create chaos, and then the solution to the chaos they create to kind of keep us in check. And I thought, okay, and so in the 6-part series, you look at this going, wow, so this is how this all works. And then I went from that to getting into what was called subliminal advertising or persuasion. Now, of course, people say, well, they said that subliminal persuasion doesn't work, and people kind of have an idea about it. And I said, well, if that's true, what if it isn't true and that it does work? And then I gave examples right away of how this is possible. Having worked in hospitality, this is the way I went about doing it. I would say, rather than, can I get you something to drink, how about a strawberry lemonade? And then you'd see the mouth actually go into motion. You're going to tell me subliminal persuasion doesn't work? And what was funny is, as I became aware of these things, such as subliminal persuasion, advertising, and even propaganda, it no longer works because you already can see what's going on right there in your face, as you say. And you're in more of a position to feel empowered to say, I won't let this affect me. Now, coming to this day and age of COVID-19, even back in March as they started doing lockdowns, I live in the state of Arizona, I was saying, well, you know what, to my wife, why don't we just pay attention just to the numbers? Let's pretend that we're in Vegas and see how this all plays out. So we were doing things such as, well, how many people die each day on planet Earth? How many people die each day in the United States? What are the leading causes of death? And so as they were cranking out these numbers, I realized, well, the numbers aren't making sense, because they're making us all feel like we should all just be falling to the ground dead as a result of this deadly virus. And what they've done is, since that's really slowed down, and actually slowed down incredibly so even months ago, that now they're focusing on scaring people with the cases. And I'm thinking, oh, how much stupider does this need to get? But then you realize there's so many people buying into it, you have to ask the question, what then do we do? I mean, look at the state of California, for instance. I mean, they got maniacs running the ship right there, but I'm thinking, you're like over 9.5 million people just in Los Angeles County. You can't run these guys up on a yard arm and hang them? I mean, why are they being allowed to get away with this? And it's pretty crazy. And so, like you said, you start arming yourself, with the knowledge and the awareness that these things happen, and then you discipline yourself out of being fearful about what's going on.
I tell you, Daniel, I mean, you got yourself an amazing start, because Edward Bernays is the king when it comes to this whole thing. And it is through him, he fine-tuned these old methods that was invented by the Romans into a whole science of how to perceive us, how to dupe us into doing stuff, and how easily manipulated we are. He was really experimenting with that his whole life, and he has been major, absolute major, in how the so-called elite have been manipulating us. Big time. So that, the documentary you just described, what was it, The Creation of the Self?
Yeah. No, it's called The Century of Self. And I think you can actually find it on YouTube now.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, yeah. And it was just an amazing documentary, and I would talk to people about this, like, if you see this, the way you see the world is going to really change the way you experience it. And you realize these people, A, they're not as smart as they think they are, but for a lot of us they seem to be. And B, you'll realize they're not as big either. This group is not as big and scary. And you even talked about that in one of the YouTube videos where you were being interviewed as part of a 3-part series, I think about a year ago.
I have no idea. I've done more,
lots of them,
almost 1,000 international interviews. But I often refer to the Wizard of Oz, which is a very, very describing way of seeing what's going on. These so-called powerful elements, if you dare to meet them and pull the curtain, you will see that it's just a bunch of small spineless individuals with no courage whatsoever, no creativity. The only thing they're good at deceiving, backstabbing, killing people, but only by signing papers. They never do it themselves. They let other people do the dirty work. But they're very, very deceitful. Many of them born psychopaths, so you can't really blame them. But these are the ones that are carrying these things out against us. But it's through the propaganda. And I thought also it's interesting you were talking about marketing, because I was contacted a while ago by a marketing salesperson who said that when she was in this business, they were using exactly the same problem reaction solution to create a need for something that you maybe didn't need at all. So they were doing exactly like you were talking about. Instead of saying, would you like to buy a drink? Then you go emotional, and you go with the senses, and you start a strawberry lemonade with ice or something, like if it's a hot day, and boom, right away you're there. So you will see every single time on the commercials on TV, they will go emotional, because it's when you're emotional, your heart opens up. That's why when they're trying to sell you a boring life insurance or something like that, it would be like granddad with a border collie running around in the sunset, and he's got like his grandchildren around him, and it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then at the end, don't. It's time for you to think about the future. Don't be selfish and don't think about your family. Prepare for your funeral. I mean, first they go emotional with the soft music and the violence and this, and then boom, at the end they just hit you with their solution. It's marketing. But when it comes to these type of operation, what they're marketing is fear. The product they're selling us is fear, because it's only through fear that they can control us. If we are not fearful, we would just give them the finger and say, if you want to fight a war, you go and fight a war. If you want this, you do it. No, 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 no. That's not what they want. They want us to do it. You know, they want us to guard each other. They want us to go out and fight unjust wars for their desires that has nothing to do with freedom and democracy and all of that. That is absolute nonsense. What we're talking about is so many wars, and unfortunately your country has been the creative part in most of them, where it's labeled like freedom, democracy, and we're going to go there and they're going to be so happy when we come and free them from their evil dictator. But it turns out very often this person was not evil at all. They're just being demonized before, once again, problem, reaction, solution, so that people through media will see, oh my God, he's absolutely evil. And then they will say, well, the only way we can deal with this guy is bomb the living hell out of that country. And that has nothing to do with freedom and liberty. When you bomb a country to smithereens, to the Stone Ages, has nothing to do with freedom or democracy to do. It's absolute domination, destruction. And just like you mentioned before, like the New World Order, out of the ruins, they will build the new world. They will destroy everything. That is the plan. The water, the earth, the plants, our gender, our sex, our family, the nations, our culture, our background, our handiwork, sorry, everything. Their plan is to destroy everything, and out of that create what they call the New World Order. Now it goes under another name. They call it the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Right. And it's fascinating because we look at this election cycle, and here's some of the experiences that I've actually had from people. You know, boy, I hope Trump wins. And the sound in their voice is, I hope someone saves us, is what they're really saying. And I'm like, well, you know, just based on that, apparently you really don't know what's going on here. And then there was a time or two I'd have somebody come up and say, well, I understand that you're going to vote for Donald Trump. Is that true? I said, well, yeah, and it isn't because I'm Republican or Democrat. I'm neither one of those two things. But what he has seemingly been doing is dismantling a lot of what the technocratic deep state globalists have been putting in place since the early part of the 1970s. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And it's, oh, well, you're not aware of that, so you don't know how big this election actually is. You're looking at it from a perspective of Democrat versus Republican, and I'm not looking at it that way. Are you familiar with what the technocracy is? And they said, well, no. I said, well, that's your first problem. So the first thing you need to do is you need to wake up and inform and educate yourself. And here's what I'd like to say about what I've seen when I've seen you being interviewed is here's somebody who's spent nearly 40 years now, let's say, looking into and investigating what most people would consider to be conspiracy theories. And it's funny because I say, well, it's a conspiracy theory until it isn't. And most of the time it turns into until it isn't, you know. And it's funny because a lot of people who do that kind of work like you've been doing over these many years, they go down the rabbit hole and they seem to get lost in it themselves, and they start kind of enclosing themselves and becoming paranoid. And in fact, just recently there was a gentleman that was featured in a big long news article here in Arizona who was kind of considered one of those first radio show hosts who was doing this, but eventually he was isolated, alone, solitary, and he ended up being shot to death by police, which they thought was probably at first malicious, but it turns out that it wasn't, so they say. But it's funny because you, on the other hand, you seem to be open. Fearless is the other thing that you say, and you're just trying to say, people, let's just take a look at this without trying to convince people, but just really be gentling, and telling people about what's going on here. And so I'm on your website now where people can fight a lot of what you've got here, and you have a lot of points that people should come to understand, as the question I'm sure you get asked a lot is this: well, what do we do about it? Well, there's the first one: wake up, inform, and educate yourself. Why don't we talk about a few others people should consider as they approach all of this?
Okay, that was a very long question, so I need to break it down in different steps. You say
so
Donald
basically
Trump,
when we have, like, say, COVID is going on, well, what do we do about it? Or there are people that are working against us, these technocrats, these globalists, George Soros, Antifa. What do we do about it? So the first one I was reading on your website is you wake up, inform, and educate yourself about what's actually going on. The number two, you start talking to your friends and family about it. And that's what I was talking about, was that list there of things you suggest people to do when they say, well, what do we do about all this? Yeah.
But Daniel, that is not what I suggest. I suggest that you avoid close family, close friends, spouses.
Okay, my apologies.
No, it's very, very important, because the people around you love you the way you were, up until the point where you started seeing these things and becoming aware. Because most of us, for most of us that start becoming aware of what's going on, it's very dramatic, it's very painful, it's very a situation of absolute despair and frustration for many people. So most of us, I have the advantage of having spent so many years in this whole, so I've been like learning to surf the waves over a long period of time. But many people that are waking up, I really don't like the word waking up, becoming more aware or opening up their mind is a more descriptive way of what's happening. But for most of them, we become very intense, when we start talking to people, and we approach the people we think they must understand, the close friends, your spouse, your family, and then you start like, oh, this and this and this and this, and what you're actually saying is that everything you believe is a lie, everything is horrible, the world is going under, it's so black, it's so evil. So people in the receiving end are, if you think of this as energy, they're like, oh my God, what's going on with this individual? And they start looking upon us as we were, like if we had started as a member in Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons or something.
Right.
So they step back and say, whoa, take it easy. But we are often so emotionally involved, so we keep pushing, and then this is where the arguments and the pain and the hurt starts. Because I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of people that have contacted me over the years saying exactly this, I feel so alone, nobody, my friends don't understand me, my family don't understand me, my spouse doesn't understand me. This is exactly it. What you should do, I would recommend, is find like-minded people where you can ventilate this whole thing and you can share thoughts and you can come to an understanding, because it is very, like when you start becoming aware of seeing, oh my God, what is going on here, when you start seeing that there are actually inside jobs, that your own government are doing things like that to you, that the police are corrupt, and that many of the authorities that are there to take care of our children and education and so on are doing the exact opposite. It's horrifying. So most of us go through almost the same type of emotions, like when we lose a loved one. First denial, then maybe becoming very angry, frustrated, sad, just diving in total despair and so on. So it's a very emotional roller coaster to start with, and then after a while, that's when you start to sort of smooth the waves a bit, and then you can move a bit more freely. So I'm very grateful that what you say about me, that I appear to be calm and that I deliver it in a way. I'm not here to persuade anyone. I'm so not interested in
And I
getting
get
into
that from
debate.
you is the point I wanted to make, because much like you, as I studied this, I realized, oh, so this is the world. I suspected this, but now I understand why it is the way it is. But I didn't go out there and beat up on everybody and said, hey, man, can you believe this? Because you get a lot of that. It's sort of like, well, did you know that this is possible? Well, no, I didn't think. And you get them to talk to you and ask questions. And I said, well, from my understanding, this is what, And then pretty soon they'll start going on their own versus, did you know that this is going on here? And, oh, we need to, because I've seen that happen. I'm like, God, look, I'm just trying to get to the ATM machine, for crying out loud. Can you just leave me alone, kind of a thing? But, yeah, I know what
Yeah.
you mean there, so.
But it's like when people say, "Who do you vote for?" I say, "I don't vote. I do not. I do not support organized crime." That is what I normally say when people ask me if I vote. And that might sound very harsh, but once you start seeing how the system is set up, it's very similar in most, especially Western countries. You've got like most of the time 5, 6 different parties. You got the Democrats, the Republicans, or the left, the right, and a party in the middle called the Center Party or something like that, or the moderate. And then you got like 2 or 3 minor parties. And so you are sort of given a hand with 5, 6 fingers on it, saying, which finger do you want? The only problem is that all of the fingers on this hand belongs to me, but you cannot see me because I'm behind the curtains pulling the strings. So to go and vote, it's an absolute waste of time, especially now when the system is so rigged, and the more digitalized it becomes, I tell you, so much easier to rig it. And you see the way that Boy George, when he, how he came into power, totally rigged system. It was through Jeb Bush down in Florida. The whole setup was there. You had the Swedish elections where the party that everybody was voting for on live TV, suddenly the screen just went black. They had I think it was 24,000 votes at the time, and the screen just went black. And when it came back, they changed the numbers to 17,000. They were hiding the what do you call it? The notes, that the election notes. The paper where you put down what party you want. It's the same now. They're hiding them. They're burning them. I get reports. People are finding whole dumpsters packed with these type of things. So it's a rigged game.
Right.
So we have to look. If you are waiting for the government to be the solution, you can wait for the next 1,000 years. The word government actually means governmented, control the mind control. That's the real meaning of the word government. So that sort of tells you something. And the people, I have this from politicians themselves, because I've been very confused over the years, because I've been feeling like, why are nobody reacting on a higher level? Why is it only down here on the grassroots where people are like, come on, you must be able to see this. But on the higher levels, they do not. Instead, it's like when there's a conspiracy like 9/11 or JFK or whatever it is, often, when there is a massive conspiracy, there's very often a secondary conspiracy, but of silence. You are met with silence. So, and the reason for that is that when you go up in society, the higher hierarchies of society, that is where these secret brotherhoods, these secret networks are hiding, through Freemasonic networks and satanic networks as well, pedophile networks, many of them going into each other. They're entangled into each other. And on that level, especially if you talk politics, you're not allowed up to the top league if you are not corrupt, where they can control you. If you let them corrupt you through blackmail, or if you do it by yourself, your career will be amazing. You will earn a lot, you will live a life in luxury, and you will be totally disloyal to normal people. But so the people to vote for the top ones, absolute waste of time. The only real president that I know of, and he came also to power through manipulation, like his dad, Joe Kennedy, took the help of the Chicago mob through Sam Giancana and got the final votes that got JFK into office. I mean, that was so close, that race between Nixon and Kennedy. And most people are not aware of that. That was I think it was only 100,000 votes that made the difference. But he, I believe, was the last real president. When he was murdered in Dealey Plaza, that was when a major step forward for these dark forces. That was a major turn around the corner. And the second one that followed was 9/11. And now we have COVID that comes like in third place here. But it's the same power structure behind. That's the thing. It's the exact same power structure. They just changed the cover so that you get a nice glossy cover with a beautiful new president, but nothing changes because the mechanism, the death machine behind the scenes are the same. Exactly the same. Doesn't matter if it's a beautiful, well-spoken individual as Barack Obama. That's not really his name. His real name is Barry Soetoro.
Yep.
And his wife Michael. But even people like that, they are just puppets in front. They are the ones giving the masses what they want. And beautiful individual, Mr. Dear Barack Obama or Barry Soetoro, but it is, if you look what's going on behind the scenes, there was more horror carried out during the reign of Obama than anyone before that. But you're never told about that. Absolutely not in mainstream media or talk shows or anything like that. They're just worshipped as absolute superstars.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And then we take a look at, for instance, all these alleged peaceful protests surrounding the death of George Floyd. And I knew when that happened, I said, oh, here we go. Here's another major false flag. I got an idea where this is going. And it was funny because as George Soros' name kept surfacing, and now it's become a household name. And back to what we were talking about earlier in the broadcast about, well, there are a lot of clues that are right in our face. Well, here's a really funny one. George Soros actually had a television show in which people would vie to win $1 million. The question was, what would you be willing to do to win $1 million? So he's actually seeing how far you'll be willing to go to try to win this $1 million. And I think maybe the show had one season. I don't think people were too interested in that. And I didn't watch any of the episodes. I just remember reading about this in the newspaper, and I'm like, well, who's George Soros? This was years ago. Oh, this is who he is. This is the kind of guy that likes to run around and bankrupt countries. And this is how he made his money. And so people will ask sometimes as they talk to me about this, well, what causes people to become this way? And I said, have you ever been at a point in your life where you've made a lot of money, where you felt like you had choices, and when you spent the money you had more? It kind of gave you an empowered feeling, didn't it? So imagine as you go up the chain, and pretty soon you know you can't ever run out of money, and you're able to actually buy people to do things for you. So now you're getting a taste of power. Then pretty soon that power increases, and this can happen to any of us. Then you get to a point where you see something wrong with a society that you allege now is beneath you, and you begin to be involved in the manipulation and believe in what it is you're doing. And I said, that's where these people are at. And so there it is. And it just makes it, as unreasonable it is. It's crazy.
I think it's really important to identify individuals behind this whole agenda, and George Soros is one of the finances of this whole thing, big time in different areas. When you talk about the money, very often it's not money they're looking for. It's the debt that is always the target, because it's through debt that they can control us. Like if you hear the word mortgage, it's actually a French word, and it means mortage, which means death cage. So it's right in your face. We will give you a mortgage for this percentage. You only have to pay for the house 3 times, and you will hardly ever get out of this slavery thing, but we will offer it to you with a really glossy and really nice pamphlet, and you might get a set of golf clubs as well if you put yourself in slavery forever and ever. That's how it's done. But Soros is a big player. And when you look at, for instance, Black Lives Matters, in my opinion, all life matters. It doesn't matter if you're green, blue, white, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, Christian, all life matters, including animal life and nature. It's like We should respect this beautiful, beautiful place that we have been given. But then we have, like, just like in a schoolyard, there are people that are bullies for different reasons. I often don't understand their reasons, and I've given up. But what I look, it's almost like, to simplify it for myself, what I come to terms with is that what is behind these operations is pure evil. That's it. We're up against evil. And most of us, normal, so-called normal people, even though we're all unique, don't want that. We don't want evil. We just want to be left alone. I saw this documentary. They traveled around, I think they went to like 95 countries or something like that, incredible, asking people what did they want out of life. And what they showed was that people, it didn't matter where you came from, wanted 95% the same thing. They wanted a happy life. They wanted education for their children. They wanted an income so that they could live and feed their family and themselves. They wanted a party from time to time, good friends, just being able to express themselves freely, creatively, word-wise, and so on. And then there was 5% where people started arguing about, where they had differences. And these were religion, sports, politics, were more or less, that was it. So 95% of us, or most of us, want 95% the exact same thing. Here, I'm in Spain, as you would like in the US, as Muhammad, whatever his name is, in Baghdad, or Amir in India. We want the same thing. But these individuals, and we're talking a handful when you compare to the rest of us, they are, I believe, they're around 8,000 in total, but in key positions around the globe, controlling us. 8,000. We are billions. Do you know how many that is? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I heard this guy who said it's like, he's a mathematician. He said it's like you're standing on this beautiful, beautiful big white beach with sand. You pick up one grain of sand, that's them. The rest of the beach, that's us. So why are we even in this situation? It's bizarre. It's a joke.
And it's not only bizarre, and I've been in this business for quite a while now, and I found it fascinating that if I'm out in public and there's a discussion, let's say it could be on weight loss and it could be on something specific that can help you, and I'll say, well, did you know that this is available and it's all natural and it's been very effective? They might just kind of look at me, oh, that sounds interesting, but who are you, kind of a thing. Now, if I go on television, my credibility just went through the roof. They're going to listen to me because I'm on the television. And this is what really drives me crazy sometimes about people and why they think and do the things they do, is for that very reason is, you mean I've got to be on TV to increase my credibility? What about just the result? Here, just give it a try. There's nothing to lose here except for maybe weight. Just give it a shot. It's all natural, that sort of thing. Well, I don't know, but if I get on TV, you mean to tell me you trust me now, even though I'm the same person? I just moved behind the screen. And you got to think, where was the allure of television and newspaper, as well as radio, that gives all this credibility to people that, in a lot of cases, aren't that credible? It's like you said, it's pretty crazy. But what I'd like to do, we have a few minutes left. There was something I really picked up on as you were doing the interview that I had seen on the YouTube video, of how it is that you confront, let's say, evil. It could be a guy from a SWAT team or that sort of a thing, and how you actually respond to that. And it was pretty fascinating how you do this and what changes and how powerful love is, for instance.
I think you're referring to when I have been in really tricky situations.
Right.
I've been a couple of times in situations where I've been approached by people in uniform that really wanted to bash my head in. And so individuals like that I find very scary, because when you see their eyes are totally black, they're pumped with adrenaline, and they have been informed that individual in front of you is the target. That's the enemy. Destroy him. So not a very pleasant place to be if you're someone like me in front of somebody like that. So what has saved me or has helped me in these situations is a thing that here we go. My brain can only think one thought at a time. So that means if I can keep my mind focused on something peaceful, then there's no space for fear. So what I do is, this person may approach me with a shotgun or a stick or whatever, shouting, screaming at me, something like that. What I do is I turn down the volume, so I do not listen to them. I do not argue with them. I do not, my body, I put it in an absolute relaxed position. Nothing that has to do with a combat stance or anything like that that can be experienced as aggressive. On the contrary, arms down, relaxed. Not easy, I'll tell you this thing. Totally relaxed, and then I focus, I look in these black eyes, and what I'm looking for is the human spark. The spark, it's a spark, because when these eyes are so black, there's no light whatsoever. They are controlled by this very powerful emotion. So what I do to keep my mind focused is I repeat the word divine, 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 divine. He's somebody's son, he's somebody's brother, he's somebody's father, he doesn't know what he's doing. Divine, divine, divine. And then when I keep repeating that word, that's just a word that works for me. I'm not religious, but that works for me, because then I look for the divine spark in him. And what I've seen a couple of times is that this person who's just about to smack my head in, there's this confusion, because these people are so trained in domination and dominance, that to control other people with violence. So when
and they have the expectation of a retaliation or pushback, so that's what they're trained for.
It's like whatever I do, they will smack me to the ground, except when I'm not doing anything. And this gets very confusing for them, especially if you do not get afraid. And then there's like this, like a millisecond of, you can see it in their eyes when they get confused, and then they get scared. It's really interesting. You see this fear thing. Why is he not fearing me? Why is he not bending over? Why is he not like that? And what has happened these two times I'm talking about is that within 5-10 minutes after this person wanted to absolutely destroy me, we've been sitting down next to each other talking like friends, and they've been telling me, well, my wife don't understand me, or I have problems with my teenage son, and both of them gave me their card, their private business card afterwards, saying, if you have any problems, if you need a ride, whatever, give me a shout, I'll come and pick you up. What is that except for a pure miracle? But I tell you, it is. I've seen other examples for it. This is just not me. It's many people have experienced similar things, but they call it the Jesus factor. It's like when you, just like Dances with Wolves, if you remember when Kevin Costner in the beginning, where he thinks he's going to lose his leg, that his whole life is over, and so he rides up and he rides parallel with the enemy lines, and he just throws up his arms, just like the native Indians surrendered themselves, and just surrendered him into this. And in that space, I call it the zone. It's the native Indians were talking about it also, that you could not wound them. You could not hurt them when they were in that space. But as soon as you let fear in, boom, that's when they said bad medicine. Good medicine when you're in the space, bad medicine when you're not. Because when you get afraid, it's game over. And I know, had I not managed to keep my mind under control in these situations, or had I tried to fight back or argue, I tell you, I am not really sure that I would even be here today. So it's an absolute beautiful experience. I love it. And what also happens is that when I look in these dark eyes and they break down, sort of, when I don't move or do anything, you see this process of confusion, fear, and then boom, suddenly there's this spark. And I know when I see, it's like a mini nuclear explosion in these dark eyes, like a tiny little spark. And when I see that, I know it's game over. And I also know and believe that I planted a seed there that will destroy their career as dominators and controllers and people of destruction. because something has cracked in their way of seeing the world. Because up until then, maybe they've been pumped up with their own ego, with their own importance and so on, and here suddenly it just got messed up for them. And I'm so happy every time I can mess a person like that up in a good way.
Right. You know, it's fascinating, too, because I've actually had those kind of experiences. Like I said years ago, working in hospitality, when you serve alcohol, people tend to get a little crazy sometimes. But people would say, well, how did you handle that so peacefully? I said, well, first of all, I looked at the fact that they were altered. Two, they don't want to turn themselves into a bad situation, so I want to help them a way out of this. And what's funny about that is they all not only become loyal customers, but they start taking ownership and protecting the place that they almost found themselves in trouble in. And it was just by doing the same thing, being common. And you see a change in them. Like, for instance, for me, what I see, maybe not the spark, but I see a child appear in front of me. Like, you're vulnerable. You know, it's really interesting. And I can't help but think of the writer Norman Mailer, who was in the documentary When We Were Kings, talking about the Muhammad Ali-George Foreman fight, the Rumble in the Jungle in Africa back in 1973, I believe it was, or 74. And he says, there's something fascinating when you see a fighter get into a ring, and they just seem larger than life and indestructible. But when that moment comes, when they get pummeled for the first time, all of a sudden you see them shrink and shrivel up and they become small. And I remember being sometimes in a confrontation where that happens, where here was somebody that just seemed awesome in power, but because I was willing to stand my ground, not necessarily argue, but say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore, all of a sudden they start getting nervous and they shrink in size, and it's just a weird phenomenon. And it sounds like, although it's been different, that kind of happened for you as well, hasn't it?
You're describing it very beautifully. And it's just, if we go back to the Wizard of Oz, do you remember the witch? Where
Yeah.
when they throw water at her, holy water, she melts. I'm melting, I'm melting. It's the same with these individuals. When you do not fear them, when you don't sort of hook into their game, they crumble. And it's the same with this elite. So when people say, what can I do? What you can't, you are so much more powerful than you have any idea about. And the
Right.
way out is to let go of fear. When you let go of fear, they cannot control you anymore. The next time you see something on TV, it's always through these screens nowadays. It's pumped out, this crap. Okay, so it's very important to find out who controls what is coming out through the black box in front of you. Is it laptops or TVs or whatever it is? Anyway, so when this comes at you, you have to take a step back. Please, the next time there's something scary on the news or whatever, take a step back. Say, I'm going to breathe here for a little while. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to hug a tree. I'm going to go out with a dog. I'm going to hug a cup, whatever makes me comfortable. And then I will come back, sit down in balance, and say, okay, let me look at this once again before I react. React, you do automatically. Act, you do with a conscious mind. And then look at it again and ask yourself, cui bono, the old one, who benefits from me believing this? And what is the solution I'm being offered? Because it's based on 99% of the times problem, reaction, solution. And it's all the time they're trying to pump you up with fear. Fear, 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 because that's the only way they can control you. If you become fearless, or like you who just said, you just stood up and said, listen, this is not okay with me. I won't tolerate this. I'm not accepting it. You don't have to fight. You just have to stand up and say, I do not consent. I do not consent to this thing. That's the only thing you need to do. This is not on with me. And so people who are waiting for Trump or whoever it is, I say keep waiting for 1,000 years. The one you've been waiting for is you. You need to get off your butt and do something. I'm not talking violently. I'm talking about make a stand, and also use your creativity to see how can I help this world? What can I do for us, not from I, me, and mine, That's a minefield. When you start becoming too much, and that's also why these super psychopaths have come into these power positions, because we've been too much up our own butt and so involved with our own life. I, me, my career, my this, and not caring about people around you. Turn it around. Focus on selfless service. Do things anonymously, not expecting anything in return. Do things, do random acts of kindness, drive-by huggings, whatever, to lift it, and empower your community, empower your family. Live by example and show that you can handle this type of information. You can handle being the type of person that you would admire. Become the person that you would admire the most. What is it you would admire with someone? What is it that you admire with Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King or people like that? They stood their ground in a non-violent and so brave way, and they changed the world. We can do the same, I tell you. We can do the same. And to quote the dear old JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for not only your country, the world. Forget about borders. What can you do for the world? And then see what kind of skills have you got, what kind of talents. Are you a good carpenter? Are you a good baker? Are you a good cop? Are you whatever? Look, whatever gives you goosebumps, that is the thing that makes you passionate enough to make a difference. And use that. You can, and use your creative mind of finding ways to say, listen. There was this group of grandmothers I heard of some years ago that was just amazing. They were living in an area that was so brutal. There was gang wars and the police was super brutal. And so what could they do? They baked cookies. They baked cookies, and then they started walking around handing out cookies. They started with the police, these very rough and hard guys that was being used to being vomited on and spit upon and called all kinds of awful stuff. Also, every time they left home, they didn't know if they were going to return alive. So people under a lot of pressure and stress, no wonder years and years of that makes them become fearful, brutal, violent, corrupt, these type of things. Then you had the gangs as well, the same type of thing there. So what they did, they started handing out these cookies, and some of these police officers almost started crying because that was the first act of kindness they'd seen maybe through their whole career. So that opened up a channel there. They started talking with the police. The police started calming down. They did the same with the gangs. They started talking down. In the end, they made like cookie parties where they got the police and the gangs to meet. So the communication started, and slowly, the whole atmosphere and situation changed, totally changed, and became so much calmer and so much, without violence, and the whole thing just eased out. Through cookies, the power of a cookie, I tell you, do not underestimate what talent you have. You just have to find a way of using it in a creative way, and then see the world change around you. Don't wait for someone else to do it. You are the one. Get off your butt. Turn off the TV. That's one way. If you don't feel well, there's on the remote, there's this beautiful button. It's normally red and round. It says off. Turn it off. Turn it off. That's part of the healing process, because it is controlled by very few people that do not mean you well. They will feed you all kinds of X Factor, Idol, I don't know all of the names of these. It's like the old Colosseum, give the people show and sports and keep them diverted so that they do not look upon what is actually happening here. That's the whole idea. And then the rest of it is propaganda to just keep us down in fear so that we can be easily controlled. So the thing is, turn it off. You press the red button. There might be a few days of withdrawal. You might get some shakings going on, feeling strange. And then after that, you will start experiencing this strange feeling of well-being. And like, what is going on? I'm not depressed anymore. It's because you have stopped the open sewage channel that is going straight into your living room through that black box that is controlled by very few people. In the US, I think you got more than 96% of mainstream media. That includes radio stations, TV stations, publishing houses, magazines, you name it, are owned by 6 corporations or less. That's 96% are owned by the same people. If that was Jeffrey Dahmer, that was the CEO or the mass murderer, like, would you listen to it the way you do now? Would you trust it if it was Al Capone that was behind this whole thing? No, you wouldn't. Or if you knew that it was mass murderers or serial killers but this is exactly, they are actually much worse. These corporations, these individuals, they do not care about you at all. At all. And in that plan is also to get rid of quite a lot of us, up to 2/3 of the population on this earth. So I'm saying absolutely no way. And one of the ways they're trying to do it is through vaccinations. I tell you, if I can have any impact, I ask you, I beg you, stay away from these needles. Stay away from them. They are very extremely dangerous. And this COVID-19 vaccine is on a scale you can't even imagine. It is, if somebody got close to my family with one of these needles, I would fight them had it been like a machine gun. The same type of weaponry. Even worse, I would say. Even worse. It is awful. So
I know it's funny too, because you also have, and we have about maybe 2 minutes left here, but Bill Gates who's coming out on this, and it's like, dude, for one thing, you're in computers and tech. You're not a biologist. And 2, you didn't even get, how lucky that guy got? He was trying to program to create an operating system, and he couldn't make it work. They happened to find somebody who had created an operating system, and they bought it from him for $8,000. His genius was how he sold it. So he was really no different than Mark Zuckerberg was with Facebook. They both took somebody else's idea and made it work, which there's even bigger stories about all that, about where all this really came from. But, you're going to listen to some guy that learned how to basically monopolize the computer industry for quite a few years, tell you what you should be doing with your health. Who made this guy the genius? And yet Netflix happens to have a documentary, Bill's Brain. Oh, this guy is just somehow much different than the rest of us? No, I don't think so.
He is different to the rest of us. He is a super psychopath.
Well, that's true. I agree with you there. But,
and if you look at every single step and aspect of this claimed corona thing, which I would say is absolutely based on super lies, every single step is controlled by Bill and Melinda Gates, the foundation, and so on. I would, if I can recommend, I made a video a while ago where I explain how I believe that I was part of stopping half of this operation that was being planned for the world. It was meant to be, it's called, if you go to YouTube, they keep shutting it down, but there's one channel that is allowed to keep it. It's called Globalist TV.
Okay.
And if you scroll down there, you will find it's Ole's most important video ever, something like that.
Okay.
And in it, I describe exactly how I stumbled over some leads that took me into understanding that there was a massive thing being planned for October the 23rd and 24th, 2019, where COVID, or this corona hoax here, was 50% of the plan, but the rest of it was to create absolute mayhem in Europe and get the whole world involved through also the World Military Games in Wuhan. That was there was more than 10,000 soldiers on location in Wuhan when this whole thing is said to have gone loose. So the whole idea and plan was that this should have been released on October the 23rd and 24th, 2019. Absolutely not when it started on the 1st of January 2020. 2020 here. That was just because 50% of the planet was neutralized by hundreds of thousands of people becoming aware of what they had been planning and helping me spread the message. So if you please go to Globalist TV on YouTube and find that one. It takes me almost an hour to go through all the different steps, but I tell you, the world could have been in a lot worse situation that we're in now. And it also shows who was involved, what are the major players in this operation that is ongoing now, and what is it all about. It has nothing to do with the virus.
Right.
The virus is the problem, reaction, solution. The virus is the problem. The solution is 5G and smart cities. They're trying to push us in to these smart cities where they can control everything through digital grid and 5G, which is needed for the speed. Otherwise, they cannot pull it off. So the whole lockdown, that's a prison term. Has nothing to do with quarantine. Lockdown is a prison term. We're being locked indoors, and a major reason for that is to unleash 5G. So you will see during the night, I think in more or less every country that I'm aware of, these 5G masts are coming up, boom, 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 but during the night, so we don't see it, and while we're being locked in.
Yeah.
But that is the plan, and total global domination.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also have a website too, lightonconspiracies.com, correct?
That is so true.
Okay.
Yeah.
People can certainly find out about a lot of the things that you're doing there and some of the things that we've been talking about. I mean, this is a conversation that can go on for hours. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time today, but I would love the opportunity to have you back on the program to even go further into this because, again, people, they'll say conspiracy, and it's sort of like, well, then it doesn't mean anything. It's like, well, conspiracy simply means this is when more than two or more people get together and plan something. That's called a conspiracy. That's pretty much what it is. And as I say, well, yeah, it's a conspiracy until it isn't. And you should see how people try to wrestle with that one.
No, but actually, the whole thing, a conspiracy, I mean, it's a conspiracy to bribery, conspiracy to theft, conspiracy to murder. That it's part of any day of daily normal court life. But conspiracy theory, that was a term that was created by the CIA after the JFK assassination, 64 to 67. They really weaponized this expression to be used against people like us, like you and me, who are just asking questions, saying, this doesn't match up, it doesn't make any sense. So to be able to get rid of people like us and to ridicule people like that, they created this conspiracy theory, because as soon as you say theory, there's a doubt. And as soon as you say conspiracy theorist, the door is open to ridicule and get rid of people like that.
Right.
Tinfoil hats is another one. By the way, tinfoil hat actually works also against different types of radiations. But so it's been a weaponized word to shut us down and ridicule us. So conspiracy theories, I'm so not interested in theories. I'm looking for the truth. I'm totally in love with the truth because it fears no investigation, it stands on its own, and it's just it's like a silver surfer on the waves. It's just beautiful. But conspiracies, oh my God, they stink. It's a massive big pile of lies and dungeon and dung, and to move a conspiracy forward, it takes so much effort because it's lies on lies and lies, and then paranoia, they fear each other. Oh my God, he's speaking too much, and he said that, and we can't get the stories right. So to move a conspiracy forward is so much heavy work. But the truth, boom, it just moves freely. Sometimes very hard to find, but it's still there. You just have to find it like the Holy Grail.
Yes, absolutely. Again, your website is Light on Conspiracy. Our guest today joining us, Ole Dammegard. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program. Again, I'd like to welcome you back. I know you're pretty busy, but I love sharing this kind of information with people because as I like to use, I guess, call it the gentle approach, because once you realize what's in front of you, you think, oh my goodness, now what do I do? But really the solutions are simple, as we've been outlining as well, what you can do. You have between your ears a mind. So learn how to be discerning in your thinking and just start making choices that work against For instance, find out what George Soros does. If he's got a business, you don't buy anything from this guy. There's just a lot of ways you can approach this, but the biggest thing is just, having an open mind and then searching and looking for the truth itself, and it does reveal itself. And I want to thank you so much for being on the program, and most of all, being on the planet and doing this for people to be able to do the same.
That's so kind of you, Daniel. And if it's okay with you, I would very much like to finish with a prayer.
Absolutely. Why don't we do that?
Like I mentioned before, I'm not religious, but I am a spiritual being, and it goes like this. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. That's the entire universe. Every single square inch be filled with peace and joy, love and light. May everyone, and especially the ones who hurt us, be filled with peace and joy, love and light. May the light of truth overcome all darkness, so victory to that light. Because, Daniel, if you look upon this from a higher point of view, you will see that had it not been for absolute assholes like Mr. Gates and the Bush family and so many other super psychopaths and super criminals, we would not have met. So many people would not sort of being pulled together now, finding their real tribe and their real family. There's so many things that comes out of these horrible things that they are creating that helps us evolve, because we're too lazy if we haven't got a flamethrower up our butt. So we indirectly had to thank them for being absolute horrible. So they need to heal as well. And when you look on a karmic level, I mean, they are taking on a lot of super bad karma on their shoulders indirectly to help us evolve. I'm not saying I'm thanking them. I'm absolutely not. But what I'm doing is I'm judging the sin, not the sinner. And I indirectly thank them for being there so that we can evolve to the next level of absolute harmony, beauty, and compassion for the future.
Absolutely, and I can tell in all your manner from what I've seen so far and what we've discussed here today, that's exactly the truth. You finally discovered a great miracle, and that is to learn how to live in service to others. And I'm telling you folks out there, when you get beyond that typical day where you're paying your bills and going to work, and you move to the level that we've been sharing with you today, your life gets in for a really wild but wonderful, magical roller coaster ride when you start living in service of others through your talents, your skills, your abilities. And it makes the world a much more colorful place because you're now in it. Ole, thank you for being on this planet, for sharing the information with our listeners here today, and I hope that we can do this again soon.
For sure, Daniel. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you so much for creating this platform for this type of information to be welcome.
You bet. Good talking with you, and thank you, the listeners out there, for sharing and being involved in our broadcast here today. You can discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, wherever you are is where you should be. Have a wonderful day.